the intensity of the battle is only going to increase. So we need to keep our eyes on Jerusalem. We need to keep our eyes on Israel. As we said, it is God's prophetic timepiece. Jerusalem and Israel are God's prophetic timepiece. Just even think about this for a moment. The modern state of Israel on the Western Gregorian calendar became a state in 1948. You know, I like numbers. Think about this, though. On the Hebrew calendar in 1948, Abraham was born. So 1948 on the Hebrew calendar, Abraham, the father of the Jewish people, the father of faith, the father of all who would believe, was born 1948. And Jerusalem is reborn as a nation 1948. Friends, that is no coincidence. And what's also interesting is that the numerical value of Jerusalem in Hebrew is 596, Yerushalayim in Hebrew. Why is that significant? Because the Hebrew word for kates, 8 hakates, the end, equals 596. It can also be read ot hakates, the sign of the end, is one potential way of reading that as well. So the reunification of Jerusalem, 596 Jerusalem, equaling the N 596, the sign of the N 596, because Jerusalem and its reunification, the coming together of the old and the new city, is a sign of the times that we are living in. It's an important prophetic sign that we should never underlook or diminish, because this is what Yeshua, Messiah Jesus, says. He says in Luke 21:24, Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So in 70 AD, the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. For sure, in 70 AD, all Jewish sovereignty over the city was, lost. Some say you could take it back even earlier than that. But for sure, in 70 AD, Jerusalem presence, Jerusalem sovereignty, Jerusalem was still spiritually, religiously governed in a sense by the Jewish people, even though Rome had ultimate control. From 70 AD until 1967, the Temple Mount, the old city of Jerusalem, was not under Jewish control. And Jerusalem's miraculous reunification is the start of the reversal of Jerusalem being crushed underfoot by the Gentile powers of the world. Wow. For thousands of years. It is a prophetic sign and a step that is paving the way for Messiah's soon return to Yerushalayim, to Jerusalem, Ir HaKodesh, the holy city. So that's pretty amazing when you think about it. The reunification of Jerusalem, which had not been unified since 70 AD, 1967. Wow, incredible. And think about it. We need to care for Jerusalem. First of all, Yeshua wept over Jerusalem. He cared about Jerusalem. We were just in Israel. I love taking groups. I hope you come with me one day on a Rock Road Rabbi tour. And as we were going down the Mount of Olives, which is in East Jerusalem, there's actually a spot called Dominus Flava. A church is built there. Beautiful overlook, beautiful place to take pictures and to learn about the city and the history. It's a site that commemorates, it's the Latin phrase for where Yeshua, for the Lord wept. Okay? So we go to the site where it's traditionally believed that the Lord wept. And he wept because he knew that Jerusalem and the Jewish people would reject his offer of salvation. It would culminate in the destruction of the temple, the exile of the Jewish people from Israel in 70 AD. And that did not change until 1948 and then ultimately in 1967. And so listen, Yeshua cared about Jerusalem. And part of caring is knowing. You can't say you care about someone if you don't know about their history, if you don't know about their background. So I want to take a brief look, both ancient and modern, very brief. And then I want to get into some of the prophetic significance, spiritual significance of Jerusalem and what it symbolizes. And so let's look at the history. So the first mention of Jerusalem in the Bible is actually found in Genesis chapter 14, where Abraham meets Melchizedek, after fighting the Canaanite kings who had taken his nephew Lot captive. And he comes out and he meets with Abraham and Melchizedek. Melchizedek meets, and Melchizedek, which means Melchi, king of righteousness, blesses Abraham, and then Abraham ties to Melchizedek. And Abraham pays his tithe to Melchizedek, who is both the king and high priest of Salem in English, or in Hebrew, Shalem. And Shalem is one of the earliest names of Jerusalem in the Bible. Jerusalem has many names in the Bible. Shalem is the earliest one found. So the first place, Genesis 14. The next place, Genesis chapter 22. You remember the story. God tells Abraham, take your son, your only begotten son, and offer him on the mountain that I'm going to show you. That mountain was Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah is the mountain that becomes the Temple Mount, where Abraham offers Isaac, becomes the place that David purchases the threshing floor, and ultimately has his son Solomon build a house for God, which becomes the temple in Jerusalem, the same place where Yeshua and the disciples worship in the second temple. The first one was destroyed by the Babylonians, and the second one was rebuilt after coming back from Babylonian exile. So Abraham, in Genesis 22:14, so Abraham called that place Adonai Yireh, the Lord will provide, and is said to this day, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. So why do I mention all this? The first two mentions of the name Jerusalem in the Bible, because there's questions about what Jerusalem, what Yerushalayim actually means. What's the name of the city actually mean? But one is that it seems to be a compound of these two names. The first name, Genesis 14, Shalem, which comes from the root for peace or wholeness. And the word in Genesis 22, Yeru, okay, or Yerah, which can either mean God provides, it can mean God will see, it can also mean awe or fear. And so Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, is a compound of these two words, which can mean they can mean one of many things. One, they will see shalom, they will see wholeness, they will see God's provision, they will experience the complete awe and shalom of God. And all of these are spiritually and symbolically true. Jerusalem is the city that represents peace. It represents wholeness. It represents an encounter with God, the awe of God, the fear of heaven, because the presence of God is going to be in Jerusalem, God says, as we'll see. And we know he's going to come and rule and reign from Jerusalem. And the first time the name Jerusalem actually occurs as a name, Yerushalayim, the same word by which it's referred to today, is Joshua 10:1. So this is early on. So let's look at the modern history. Jerusalem is the place that connects heaven and earth. It's interesting because think about it. Jerusalem is the place where Yeshua would go up 3 times a year to worship on Pesach, Passover, on Shavuot, and Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. So he goes up there to celebrate these three biblical holidays as it was commanded for all Jewish men to do. He died in Jerusalem. He rose in Jerusalem, and he is going to return to Jerusalem because that is the city of the great king. It's the city where David made the capital for the united tribes, the unified 12 tribes of Israel. And from that point on, it has always been the governmental and spiritual center of the world. Okay. And again, going back to Abraham, who is the father of all faith. So it's no surprise that it's both a holy city for Jews, for Christians, and for Muslims. And we'll talk more about that. But let's look at the modern history and why we have this modern holiday known as Jerusalem Day, Yom Yerushalayim in Hebrew. Can you say that? Yom is day, Yerushalayim is Jerusalem. So in 1947, the British are ultimately leaving the land of Israel. They come up with, in conjunction with the United Nations, they come up with what is known as the UN Partition Plan for Palestine, and they decide that half the land is going to be given for a Jewish state, half the land is going to be given for an Arab state. Jerusalem is going to remain neutral. It would remain an international city for the first 10 years, and then a referendum would be offered, and based upon voting, Jerusalem's inhabitants would decide, is it going to be part of the Jewish state or is it going to be part of the Arab state? That was the plan laid forth by the British in conjunction with the United Nations in 1947. 1948, Jerusalem declares statehood. The Jewish people accept the UN partition plan. They accept Jerusalem being an international city. They accept it being voted on in a referendum 10 years later, but the Arab nations surrounding her do not accept it. They do not accept Israel as a Jewish state. They do not accept the UN partition plan. And so ultimately, what do? They attack Israel. And although Israel is greatly outnumbered and outgunned, miraculously, they won the battle for independence. Everyone thought it was going to be another Holocaust, but by God's grace and by the tenacity of the Israeli people, the Jewish people, they won independence. Then the next major war, May 15th, 1967, Egyptian troops gathered on the southern border. May 18th, Syrian troops amass on the northern border. Both Egypt and Syria made it clear that they were going to attack Israel and wipe Israel off the map. They were going to destroy the fledgling state. Okay. On May 22nd, Egypt closed the Straits of Tiran and all Israel shipping comes to a halt. King Hussein of Jordan establishes a defensive pact with Egypt, and the president of Iraq declares, our goal is clear, to wipe Israel off the map. June 4th, Iraq joins a military alliance with Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. 465,000 troops, 2,800 tanks, 800 aircraft surround the small state of Israel. But everything changed after 6 days. On June 5th, God began to do a turnaround. It seemed as if Israel was going to be destroyed again. Israel says, listen, we don't have the manpower. We don't have the luxury of waiting. Our enemy's intentions are clear. They launch a preemptive strike, and within a couple hours, 300 Egyptian aircraft are destroyed. They attacked also the Jordanian, the Iraqi, and the Syrian air forces, and the majority of their air forces were wiped out. Now Israel had air superiority. That has always been one of Israel's military advantages. They declare their philosophy is clear skies over Israel. There can be no one that can have greater air superiority. They have to maintain the air. But then the battle moved to the ground. the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Iraqis, the Syrians, they all attack. And the battle began to grow. Okay. What you need to understand is at that time when Israel declared itself a state and the battle for the War of Independence began in 1948, Israel could not gain control of the old city of Jerusalem or the West Bank. That meant everything today where all the ancient holy sites are, okay, anything beyond Zion Gate, which includes everything in the old city, including Christian sites such as the Tomb of the Holy Sepulchre, the Via Dolorosa, the Mount of Olives, Bethlehem, Jericho, Judea, Samaria. All of this was in Jordanian hands. That's called the East Jerusalem or the West Bank, because on the West Bank of the Jordan River. And West Jerusalem, everything outside of Zion Gate, which included the Mount Zion and the upper room, and then the new city of Jerusalem was all in Jewish hands. You can still see when we go to Israel, we go to the upper room, you can still see the bullet holes in the ancient Ottoman wall of the old city that's at Zion Gate. On June 7th, the order was given to recapture Jerusalem. Israeli paratroopers stormed the city. They recaptured it from Jordanian control. And at the Kotel, at the Western Wall, Chief Rabbi Moshe Goren blew a shofar to celebrate. The Western Wall, the Temple Mount, the old city was back in Jewish hands after 2,000 years. It was a miracle. It was prophecy coming to pass. It was a sign that the times of the Gentiles trampling Jerusalem underfoot was beginning to be reversed, that God's promises were being restored. And to just be clear, this was a totally defensive war on behalf of Israel. They did not instigate it. They did not want it. And it could have been the end of Israel, but God turned it into a great victory. Baruch Hashem, Todah La'el. We praise and give thanks to him. And in the end, Jerusalem was reunified. Not only did they capture East Jerusalem, they captured the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, the entire West Bank. It's a miracle. And there still is spiritual conflict over it to this day. That is a brief history, so you understand. But friends, Jerusalem is worth celebrating. And I want to talk a little bit more about the spiritual prophetic significance of Jerusalem. Okay? Jerusalem is the place that God chose his name to dwell. Listen to what 2 Chronicles 6 says. And he, meaning Solomon, said, "Blessed be Adonai, the God of Israel, who with his hands has fulfilled what he spoke with his mouth to my father David, saying, since the day I brought my people out of Egypt, I did not choose a city of all the tribes of Israel in which to build a house that my name might be there. Nor did I choose any leader to be leader over my people Israel, but I have chosen Jerusalem, that my name might abide there. I have chosen Jerusalem that my name might abide there, and I have chosen David to be over my people." 2 Chronicles 6, 4 through 6. Wow. Jerusalem is unique. No place like it in the world. It is God's eternal home. It's the place that he chose to call home. It is God's house. It is the place where God abides in a unique and special way. And we see that even in the name Jerusalem. Now I'm going to give you a little Hebrew lesson. I hope you're ready, okay? In Hebrew, you put suffixes, you put endings on Hebrew words, and they mean something, right? So im in Hebrew, it's plural. If you say ayim in Hebrew, it's double. So if I say eyes, einayim, 2 eyes, einayim. Okay, raglaim is feet. Yadayim is hands. Yadayim, ayim, means double. Jerusalem. What does that mean, right? Literally, in the name, it implies a doubling, that there are two Jerusalems. And so there is a spiritual idea that there is a Jerusalem above and there is a Jerusalem below. And there is a heavenly Jerusalem and there is an earthly Jerusalem, and the two connect and correspond to one another. And that's what we see. There is a new Jerusalem coming out of heaven to earth where the old Jerusalem was. And there's biblical support for this in the Hebrew. In Psalm 122, verse 3, it says, Jerusalem is like a city compacted together. And the famous Rabbi Rashi, the biblical commentator, says, Jerusalem, there's a Jerusalem in heaven and a Jerusalem on earth that is destined to be like it. So the earthly Jerusalem is destined to be like the heavenly Jerusalem. And friends, we even see this in the numbers. Jerusalem 596, Jerusalem, is also the numerical value of the word makom kadosh, holy place. So Hebrew is alphanumeric. Let me explain. You write numbers with letters in Hebrew. So the fact that numbers are interchangeable with letters, every Hebrew word, when you add up the letters, has a value. Jerusalem 596, makom kadosh, holy place 596. And Hebrew, ahafti lenetzach. Okay, my love for eternity, 596. Jerusalem is God's holy place. It's his love for eternity. He loves the city. Yeshua loved the city. He wept over it. Shalom ad olam. 1 Kings 2:23, there will be shalom forever. Shalom forevermore. 596. Jerusalem, it's the meaning of the name, Jerusalem, city of peace. But it also connects to Messiah in a number of ways. I'm not going to go into it deeply, but the phrase in Psalm 2, which is a Messianic psalm, why did they took a stand against the Lord and against his anointed? That phrase, al Hashem, the al Meshicho, against the Lord and against his anointed, equals 596, because it is a city of the king, and all the world is going to come against the Lord and against his anointed by coming against Jerusalem in the end of days. That's part of the spiritual significance of what we need to understand. This is clearly what Zechariah 12 says. It says this, behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of reeling to all the surrounding peoples when they besiege Jerusalem as well as Judah. And moreover, in that day, I will make Jerusalem a massive stone for all people. Wow. Jerusalem, a cup of reeling. Jerusalem, a massive stone. Why? Because they're coming against the Lord and against his anointed. Because God said it is his city. Therefore, we see that even the attack against Israel on October 2nd was called the Al-Aqsa flood. Al-Aqsa is a reference in Islam to the Temple Mount. And so, although it was the house of God, the holiest site for Jewish people, the place that goes back to David and Solomon and back to Abraham even earlier and Joshua, okay? It is not only a holy site for, number one holy site for Jewish people, but it is the third holiest site for Muslims, because they believe that in one of Muhammad's night visions, he ascended to heaven from there based on a verse in the Quran. But when the Quran was written, there was no Al-Aqsa Mosque there. So it's historically revisionist, but whatever the case might be, it is the third holiest site for Islam. That's why you have the Golden Dome and you have the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And part of the attack on October 7th was them saying the Jews are trying to rebuild the temple. They're trying to kick Muslims off, and therefore they led this attack. So friends, I say all this to see prophetically how you can literally see, even at this very moment in time, the Zechariah 12 passage being fulfilled. It is a cup of reeling. It is a stone for the nations. The world is coming against Israel. The world is coming against Jerusalem. There is an attack on the holy city. and to take it out of Jewish sovereignty. And it's only going to get worse, because just like Jerusalem was destroyed by Babylon the first time, we see in the book of Revelation, there is the holy Jerusalem, then there is the new Babylon, okay? And the two are going to be in conflict with each other. The intensity of the battle is only going to increase. So we need to keep our eyes on Jerusalem. We need to keep our eyes on Israel. As we said, it is God's prophetic timepiece to understand the times in which we're living. But we know Yeshua's feet are going to stand on the Mount of Olives in East Jerusalem. He's going to come into his city, and he is going to restore the kingdom as he promised, bring salvation to Israel, salvation to the nations, and bring the new Jerusalem and establish his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. May that day come speedily and soon.